Today is March 15th, 2014, and I'm sitting here with my father, Mark Wood, at Wilkesboro, North Carolina, at his house. And so I am a sophomore at Appalachian State University, and I'm going to be interviewing him on his service in the Air Force. So, Dad, when and where were you born?
I was born here, Wilkes County, September 25th, 1962.
So, how old were you when you joined the Air Force?
I was 19.
Why did you join the Air Force? What was your thoughts?
Well, my older brother had been in the Air Force. His name was Robert, and I kind of patterned it after him. And so it actually happened that the day I went in was exactly 10 years to the day that he went.
Now, did you have any previous college experience?
I had 1 year of college. It was community college after graduating from Western Wisconsin.
So, what would you say for basic training?
Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
How many weeks was that?
That was a 6-week program at the time.
And what was that?
Well, when you first get there, you think it's going to be really tough, and they play some mind games with you. And after it's over with, you look back and think about how it wasn't near as bad as you thought it was. But it was a good experience overall.
Now I know that after you completed your basic training, you were looking forward to get assigned to fighters. Why would you want to go to fighters?
Well, to start out with, I got assigned to aircraft armament systems, and I left basic training. I went to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado for our armament systems training, and it was there when I found out I was going to be on F-15s, but I could have just as easily been on B-52s or any other type of aircraft that carried any kind of weapon system. But I was an aircraft armament system specialist on F-15s.
Now, after you finished your training or working with armament systems, where were you stationed at?
I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base at Hampton, Virginia. I was in the 1st Tactical Fighter Wing, the 71st Tactical Fighter Squadron, and through that we was attached to the 71st Aircraft Maintenance Unit.
Now, wasn't Langley a pretty hot spot on the East Coast?
Langley was headquarters for Tactical Air Command at the time, and had been for many years. So it was we had a lot of officers on there, probably about twice as many as normal base would have, just because of all the headquarters people there. And so we had 4 squadrons there. Besides our 3 of the 1st Tank Fighter Wing, we also had the 48 Fighter Interceptor Squadron on our base, which was East Coast defense for the United States. And so our base was a pretty big base.
Now, you told me a story of a flight you had, cargo plane, C-130.
Right, we had been to Wendover, Utah to fly in the desert for 6 weeks, and we were on the way home. And was walking up to the cockpit. We got to take turns riding in the engineer's seat there in the cockpit. As I was heading up there, we hit an air pocket over the Rocky Mountains, and we dropped about 500 feet, and so I caught myself hanging on the cable that ran the distance to the inside of the fuselage with my feet about 2 or 4 feet off the ground, and that was kind of a funny feeling.
Now, what were you doing in Utah?
That time we'd go out and basically what my unit trained for was to go into the Middle East and fight, and we were a rapid deployment force group. We could be anywhere in the world flying in 48 hours, but it was always anticipated that we'd go somewhere in the Middle East, and so we would go out into the desert, such as a deserted place like Wendover, and fly and simulating that we were over in the Middle East flying.
Now, didn't you have a problem with Wendover with one of the F-15s there?
Well, we had some different problems. We had one problem when we were at Nellis Air Force Base during red flag with a particular aircraft whose right main landing gear sometimes would fail to come down, and the pilot would have to fly and cycle it, and they would bring it down, check it out. Couldn't get it to duplicate the problem. They'd sign off the red X out of the logbooks on the airplane, send it back up, pilot come back, and that gear wouldn't come down, and have to cycle it. Anyhow, finally on the last trip it made, the gear never would come down. The pilot tried to land with a left main gear and a nose gear, and was going to take the barrier cables at the end of the runway and try to lay the airplane over on its wing real easy, and crosswind caught him about halfway down the runway and see him cartwheeling out into the sand. The pilot was not hurt very bad, but the aircraft was damaged heavily.
Now, shifting back to Langley, what was it like?
Langley was depending on where you were at. If you're on the flight line, it was pretty laid back. If you were having to do something on base, you were constantly having to salute somebody because there were so many officers there. But we normally worked, unless we were playing war games, we worked a normal 8-hour shift. Went in at 4 in the afternoon. Our normal shift was to midnight, and our job was to fix any weapon system problems that would happen during the day. Load the airplanes for the next day. That whatever at that time we were just flying inert missiles, which meant it had a live seeker head in the front, but it had no warhead or no rocket motor in it. But they could go out and lock onto other jets as they'd done mock dogfights. We loaded the ECM pods, which were electronic countermeasure pods. It went on the missile rail in the same place where the AIM-9 sidewinders went, and so that gave them their electronic countermeasures that they could use. We also at times would do live fires with the gun. They would bring in these tow planes, and they would tow these targets out behind them, and they would shoot target practice ammo during those times. But normally it was just a simple 8-hour shift, and sometimes you were loading airplanes, and sometimes, because we were in 3-man crews, sometimes your job for the night might be to fix any reported problems or discrepancies the airplane had. So some nights you were doing troubleshooting, and some nights you were doing loading. Once a month, we had to go through load qualification training in front of an inspector. It was in a special hangar that we called load barn. We had to go do a full load on the aircraft. We were timed on it, and also you could get technical write-ups because you had a technical order, or a TO book as we call it, for everything we done. It told you exactly what you're supposed to do and how to do it. So the evaluator stood there and graded you on that. And the load crew I was assigned to the last 3 months we were load crew of the month every month. So we ended up being load crew of the quarter, and which meant we turned the fastest load with the least amount of write-ups.
Now, you got to sit in the cockpit for 15, 7 times. Did you have a little fun with that?
I did. When we would run certain tests on the weapon system, I could bring the weapon system up in the cockpit, and due to the heads-up display that the F-15 had, it projected everything out front. So if you had the seeker head on, or you had the radar running, you could sit there and track the service vehicles on the flight line, which would either be the fuel trucks or the tug tractors that were out there. Sometimes the occasional crew chiefs had looked like what we would call a bread van or a potato chip van out there on the flight line that they run around with. And so we used to lock them up with a missile and track them around and pretend we shot them.
How could you told me you could lock up a cigarette, right? A cigarette butt?
Yeah, we could lock up a burning cigarette at, I have stood as far away as probably 100 yards from the airplane. When we were in Florida, we were having a missile problem. We were having problems going down there, flying live missiles, and we brought one up down there, and my flight chief sent me up on top of an embankment where we parked in front of it, more like a revetment, and had me walk back and forth with a cigarette while they tracked that cigarette back and forth.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was very impressive.
So now, if you did you want to be stationed anywhere else?
I would always wanted to go over in the South Pacific. I really wanted to go to Guam, but Guam had B-52s, and B-52s carried 108 500-pound bombs. And as a weapons loader, I just didn't care about loading 108 500-pound bombs.
Now, when you were in, didn't the 71st big record?
We did. Actually, it was the first tank fighter wing. The 71st was part of that. They had recently failed an operational readiness exercise before I got there, and that's not a good thing. And so we had another one about 3 months after I got there. And because they had failed the first one so bad, they upped the stakes on the second one. And so our job was to fly 1,000 sorties in 3 days with 72 airplanes. And we ended up at roughly right around 1,200 sorties in 3 days, which is a world record. We carried over 95% readiness capability with our aircraft at all times during that time period. I don't know that record has ever been broken. Flying that many sorties in 3 days with that amount of airplanes.
Now, the first tech fighter wing was switched to the F-22s. How do you feel about that?
Well, the F-22 can do things the F-15 couldn't do, but the F-15 can do some things that the F-22 can't do. So they with the F-22 you can shoot from further out. They can't see you coming. They can supercruise, which means they can stay above Mach 1 for longer periods of time. But the F-22 does not have the brute out speed that a F-15 had, and that was one reason it's made F-15 so successful, is because its ability to get out there and run when it had to. The F-15 is the only current fighter that we have in the inventory that every battle it's ever been in, it's never been shot down in an air-to-air conflict. Now the F-22 hasn't, but it hasn't really been tried in air-to-air combat either. So that's one of the distinctions, because the Israelis fly it, the Japanese fly it, and of course we fly it. And with the Israelis, it's been in several combats situations against good MiG aircraft, and it still has never been shot down in an air-to-air combat in a dogfight.
Now, didn't your squadron get the first air-to-air kill over Desert Storm?
Yes. That was their first and only one, but they got an air-to-air kill on the first day.
Now, when did you leave?
I left in March of 1984.
Why'd you leave so early?
Well, I got out a year early due my mom, which was your grandmother. She was having some really bad health problems at the time, and she was almost bedfast, as we would say, so to speak. So the Air Force gave me an honorable discharge under hardship conditions to come home and take care of my mom. So I was scheduled to get out in November of 1985, would have been my normal separation date.
If you'd have stayed until 85, would you have re-enlisted?
It's hard to say. I enjoyed what I did, but I missed home too. When you're kind of a homeboy, it was a great experience, but it's hard to have a family life when you're in the military.
Now, at Langley, did you have any other fun outside of the base itself? Like, what was there to do?
Well, our base was right on the Chesapeake Bay. Actually, the flight line, you could look out into the Chesapeake Bay right on the flight line. But Virginia Beach was about 30 miles away. There's a little beach named Buckrow Beach, which was about 10 miles away. And so we went there. I had some buddies that lived down toward Virginia Beach that were just civilians that I had befriended over the time I was there, and so they taught me to surf. So in the summer months, on our time off, we used to go down to Virginia Beach and do some surfing.
Now, did you ever get to meet any big generals or any famous pilots?
Well, we had a lieutenant colonel, that was our squadron commander, and then a full bird colonel that was our wing commander. But not necessarily any particular famous ones. President Reagan came to our base when I was there. I didn't get to meet him personally, but I saw him get off the airplane. And of course, he was commander-in-chief at the time. So that was a pretty neat deal. I saw one of the college students that had been, I think it was in 1983, it was either late 82 or 83, who had been kind of taken captive in Grenada. When we went down there and got them and brought them home, they brought them to Langley on a 747, and that's was their first step back onto U.S. soil. And I was there that day when they came in and watched them debark the airplane and get back onto U.S. soil. That was a pretty neat deal.
Now, did you ever have any injuries in the time of the Air Force?
Yeah, I got my head cut open a couple of times, and due to some missiles, took some stitches to the head. Catching a canard wing or something, they were pretty sharp. They lay you up pretty quick.
Now, if you could go back and do it again and be a pilot, would you do that instead, or would you still?
Nah, I'd rather fly. I would want to fly, but it's one job is really just important to the other one. If the airplane's not serviced properly and configured right, then it's not going to do the pilot job. So it takes the pilot and the crew to make the airplane fly.
Now, what's your take on our military and Air Force today?
Well, I think in the Air Force today, it's we're more skilled. We got things that we didn't have when I was there. But it does bother me the fact the way they're trying to cut our numbers back. One of the present moves right at the moment is to even with our army is to cut it back below World War II numbers. And I think in today's time, as volatile world as we live in, I know the government's got to cut back on some money, but I think cutting back the numbers of our military is a kind of stupid thing to do. Maybe cutting some foreign aid away to be able to keep our military up where it needs to be would be a smarter move. But that decision's not left up to me. But that the F-22 is a great jet. The Air Force is getting ready to come on with the F-35. That'll be a good vehicle. They're talking about finally retiring the A-10. I'm not real positive that's a real smart idea. The A-10 can do some things that be hard to be duplicated and anything else just because of the way that aircraft is made.
Thank you for the time and your service.
All right. Thank you for your interview.